Vietnam, the Sea Tigers. The Vietnamese Marines were one of the two elite regular infantry formations serving the Republic of Vietnam. The Marines were part of the General Reserve and therefore trained to be highly mobile, conventional infantry, readily deployable to any location at all times. Within the reserve, they rivaled the famous Red Berets of the Airborne in their iconic tiger stripes. In any serious breakthrough by communist forces, the regular infantry could expect to spot either the red or green on the battlefield. At the beginning, the Vietnamese Marine Corps started as the infantry arm of the Republic of Vietnam Navy, which was formed on March 6, 1952. But because of typical French neglect, the Navy's first unit, the Vĩnh Long Divisions Navales d'Assaut, shortened to DINASAULT, was not raised until April 1953. Vietnam had two major river deltas, the Red River Delta of the north and the Mekong River Delta of the south. These waterways served as a main mode of transportation for the major rice-growing areas of Vietnam. As such, they needed their own specialized force. To fill this role, DINASAULTs were composed of roughly a dozen river boats. The boats were manned by naval personnel, but also included a landing element of about 100 infantry who could engage communist forces inland. However, while the French DINASAULTs were in active combat throughout the Indochina War, the Vietnamese DINASAULTs remained neglected. When the French started to withdraw, the Vietnamese Navy only had 1,484 men. On October 13, 1954, President Ngo Dinh Diem of the newly declared Republic of Vietnam signed a decree to activate the Marine Corps. This newly created force absorbed the DINASAULT's infantry, along with many other scattered commando units, formally designating them all as Marines. This force grew to 2,373 by early 1965, and its first Marine Landing Battalion was activated in Nha Trang. At this early stage of the war, the Marines faced a threat to their existence. Under the new American assistance, the armed forces would be capped at 150,000. The Marines would be forced to demobilize down to 1,137. Army leadership also actively argued against the need for the Navy to have their own infantry. The Vietnamese Marines would fight for their survival. Three factions within South Vietnam, the Hoa Hao, Cao Dai, and Binh Xuyen, rebelled against the Republic of Vietnam in early 1955. By mid-May, the Airborne and regular ARVN absorbed the Cao Dai forces and forced the Binh Xuyen out of Saigon into Rung Sat. It was in the Rung Sat swamps and the waterways of the Mekong Delta where the Marines excelled. The 1st Landing Battalion joined 29 other battalions to chase down the remaining Binh Xuyen and fight the Hoa Hao in the Delta. By July, 8,000 Hoa Hao surrendered, and in August, the Marines destroyed their headquarters. It then wiped out the remaining Binh Xuyen by February 1956, deploying with the Navy's river boats to reach them. It was clear that South Vietnam would need a force specialized in amphibious fighting. The Marines earned their right to exist. Victorious, the Vietnamese Marines returned to Nha Trang, where they would completely reorganize. At this point, it had 6 riverboat companies, 5 light support companies, the 1st Landing Battalion, a training flotilla, and a small headquarters group. The riverboat and light support companies were disbanded. In their place, a motor company and headquarters and service company were activated. With the success of the 1st Landing Battalion, the 2nd Landing Battalion would be formally activated at Cam Ranh Bay. But even with the rebels put down, the communists started to reactivate for war. When the National Liberation Front's insurgency started in the late 1950s, the Marines were amongst the first groups deployed against them. Unfortunately, with the backing of the North, the NLF insurgency only continued to grow. The Marines expanded in response. The 3rd Landing Battalion was formed on June 1, 1959, and the Marines would officially join the Airborne as part of the Republic of Vietnam's elite strategic reserve. Now, one of South Vietnam's premier fighting units, the Vietnamese Marines would cultivate their own esprit de corps. They were all volunteer, encouraging only the most dedicated and courageous men to join their ranks. The Marines adopted their own emblem, designed to pay homage to that of their American Marine advisors, but adapted to have Vietnamese characteristics. Against the distinctive red beret and leaf pattern uniforms of the Airborne, the Marines rivaled them in green berets and the brand new tiger stripe camouflage. These tiger stripes would become the signature of the Republic of Vietnam's Marine Corps. As elite units within the General Reserve, the Marines were deployed to provinces in need, usually ending up in some of the most rugged and remote locations around South Vietnam. They fought close to or within Communist territory, taking the brunt of the fighting and casualties. By August 1961, the NLF forces were now engaging in battalion-sized operations. In response, to gain more firepower, the Marines raised a 75mm pack howitzer battery and activated the 4th Landing Battalion, deploying to the battlefield in 2 battalion pairs. On January 1, 1962, the Marine Group was formally redesignated as a brigade. The Marine Corps expanded to an authorized total of 5,483 strong. During the early 1960s period, the Marines conducted numerous operations throughout South Vietnam. Many had mixed results, with some managing to inflict casualties on NLF forces or destroy base areas, while many others resulted in enemy units managing to escape. In 1962 alone, the Marines conducted 23 combat operations and spent 404 days in the field. Unique to the Marines, they also conducted amphibious operations into remote areas such as the Cà Peninsula. Due to the extremely dense U Minh forest, the peninsula was only accessible by sea or air. In 1961, they launched 2 operations into Cà, then 12 amphibious operations in 1962, then another large landing on board larger LSTs and LSMs in 1963. By mid-1964, with experience gained on their deployments, the Marine Brigade created dedicated task force HQs, Alpha and Bravo. These task forces served as forward headquarters which could better control Marine battalions on the ground, but also communicate more effectively to the province, corps, or divisions which the Marines were attached to. Heading into 1965, the Strategic Reserve was stretched thin. Airborne, Ranger, and Marine units were almost always committed into the field, leaving no reserve at all. So the 5th Marine Battalion was also activated, scheduled to finish its training by mid-1965. However, the problem would only be made worse at the end of 1964. On December 27th, an NLF force, estimated to be battalion size, seized the village of Bình Giã. The 4th Marine Battalion and 3 Ranger companies retook it on the 30th. But after an American helicopter was shot down, the 2nd Company was ordered to secure the bodies. The NLF launched an ambush, pinning down the company with heavy firepower, forcing the rest of the 4th to try to rescue them. The rest of the NLF force, an entire regiment, surrounded the Marines, inflicting heavy casualties. Only small groups managed to make it back to Bình Giã. Out of the 426 men, 112 were killed, 71 wounded, and 13 missing. The Rangers nearby also ran into their own ambush, crushed by another NLF regiment. What was thought to be a single NLF battalion turned out to be 2 regiments of the 9th NLF Division. It was a decisive defeat. The overextension of the General Reserve, alongside the defeats at Bình Giã and Áp Bắc, cemented the need for American troops on the ground. The following year of 1965, the first American Marines would land in Da Nang. The Vietnamese Marines would have to take a step back to recover. While American combat troops took over the offensive fighting in the war, the Vietnamese Marines continued to fulfill their General Reserve duties. From the mid to late 1960s, the Vietnamese Marines spent 80 to 90% of the time in the field, usually with only 1 battalion remaining in Saigon, while the others were deployed. In 1966, they managed to maintain a 6-to-1 kill ratio over Communist forces, eventually activating a 6th battalion, allowing each task force to keep a battalion in Saigon, and 2 in the field. The task forces would then be raised to brigade level to reflect their new responsibility. The Vietnamese Marines would stay at the 6th Infantry Battalion structure for the next several years, taking part in larger Allied operations, then fighting in the heart of Saigon and Hue during the Tet Offensive. In 1970, the war was changing. With American forces pulling out, the entire South Vietnamese armed forces needed to be expanded to compensate for the loss. In June, the Vietnamese Marines would change the designation of its brigades from Alpha and Bravo to numbers. Brigade Alpha would become the 147th, which included the 1st, 4th, and newly raised 7th Battalions. Bravo would become the 256th, which included the 2nd, 5th, and 6th Battalions. In September, a 3rd would be raised as the 369th, and the 256th would be renamed the 258th. The VNMC was formally redesignated as a division-level formation and given an approved ceiling of 13,188 men. The Marines would also gradually change their role in the defense of South Vietnam, with the American Marines leaving Military Region 1. The Vietnamese Marines would have to take their place. From this point on, the VNMC battalions almost exclusively deployed into I Corps. They were deployed in fire bases located along the Trường Sơn mountain range of Quảng Trị, forming the western flank of the defensive ring. In Quảng Trị province, these men would face the brunt of the North Nguyen Hue offensive, and the Vietnamese Marines would reach the height of their prestige, demonstrating exactly why they were one of the elite formations of the Republic of Vietnam. On March 30th, 1972, alongside intense, heavy howitzer bombardment, the 304th, 308th, and 324B Pavan Infantry Divisions, 3 independent infantry regiments, and the 202nd and 203rd Armored Regiments smashed into the outer defensive ring of I Corps. The 3rd Infantry Division disintegrated in the face of the armor, while the Marines lost several outer fire bases. They held firm at Dom Ha Bridge and Firebase Pedro. The 2 brigades, alongside some Rangers and armor, could barely form a cohesive defensive line. The Marines were overstretched. On April 27th, after the Marines held on for a month, the 3 Pavan divisions finished regrouping and renewed their offensive. Severely outnumbered, all ARVN units fell back. Quảng Trị province was lost. The Marines did not stand still. While the Airborne were deployed into I Corps, the Marines held the line against continuous communist attempts to push into Thừa Thiên province. They also conducted several mobile operations to keep Pavan forces off balance. These included several amphibious landings. It was clear the Marines lived up to their name. Finally, on June 28th, Operation Lam Sơn 7-2 was launched. The Airborne spearheaded the way to Quảng Trị, side by side with the Marines. The combined force of both of the Republic of Vietnam's elite divisions steadily pushed forward against very heavy enemy entrenchments. That month, 1,515 enemy soldiers were killed, and 18 armored vehicles were destroyed. Unfortunately, once the Airborne reached the city on July 7th, they got bogged down in intense urban fighting. To try to break the stalemate, the Marines launched several heliborne landings across the river, threatening the communist rear. They eventually cut the main North Vietnamese supply line into the city on July 14th, relieving the fighting inside the city. However, after continuous fighting in the Central Highlands, then An Lop afterwards, it was clear that the Airborne were too worn down to push forward. General Ho Quang Trung, commander of I Corps, ordered the Marines to replace the Airborne and take Quảng Trị city back. It was the Marines who lost Quảng Trị, so it would be the Marines who must take it back. After nearly 2 months of grueling urban fighting, the gold flag and 3 red stripes of the Republic flew over the citadel again. The Marines regained their pride. By the end of the Vietnam War, the Republic of Vietnam Marine Corps had the distinction and honor of being deployed on the border against North Vietnam. It stood as the very first line of defense against direct communist aggression, facing off 3 Pavan divisions which could launch an attack at any time. The Marines would undergo a final expansion near the end of the war. Through Operations Enhanced and Enhanced Plus, they were given 12 guided anti-tank tow systems, the perfect weapon against another armored thrust from the north. They were also delivered LVTP-5 landing craft. While they impressed onlookers during the 1973 Armed Forces Day Parade, they were severely short of spare parts and extremely outdated. But to the Marines, they were symbolic pieces of equipment. To try to restore some reserve units in the overstretched General Reserve, the Joint General Staff directed the formation of the final Marine Brigade, the 468th. The order was made in December 1974, with the 14th, 16th, and 18th Battalions activated and trained, set to be deployed in April 1975. Unfortunately for them, they would have to be rushed to the battlefield before they were ready. After Phuoc Long Province was taken in January 1975, PAVN units launched an offensive in 2 Corps, successfully seizing Ban Mae Thuột by mid-March. With the risk to Saigon, President Nguyen Van Thieu made the fateful decision to order the Airborne back to Region 3. Its withdrawal would turn out to be absolutely devastating to the morale of civilians and soldiers alike. The Marines would have to be pulled back to defend Da Nang in their place. The Airborne's only replacement was the 468th Marines, who would arrive on March 17th with only 2 of its battalions ready. The withdrawal to Da Nang ran into issue. From the northern plains, the Hai Van Pass was cramped with hundreds of thousands of refugees. The 147th Marine Brigade would have to be delivered to Da Nang by the Navy instead. They reached Tân Mai on March 23rd, waiting for Navy ships. The Navy arrived too little, too late. The 147th was trapped between 130mm howitzers and the ocean. Only a few men managed to swim to the ships. One of the Marines' core units was wiped out. For the 258th and 369th Brigades, only half of them made it to Da Nang through the chaos. Da Nang was crammed with nearly 1 million refugees trying to make it out, making any defense impossible. South Vietnam's second largest city collapsed when General Ngo Quang Trung ordered the remaining 4,000 Marines evacuated out. Military Region 1 was lost. Whatever remained of the Marines would redeploy again to defend the Republic's capital, forming a part of the defensive ring around Saigon. They would hold off an armored assault at Ho Nai, destroying numerous T-54s before the order was given to surrender. The Striped Tigers ceased to exist, after fighting for the Republic to the very end.